the Grand Strategy Group. Thank you all for joining us today for this important statement on reprioritizing Ukraine and boosting European security. I think we've all been fairly clear that the mood at the recent Munich Security Conference was palpably and pervasively grim. And it's grim for good reason. But amidst that doom and gloom, there were sparks of light. There were real signs that leaders who understand the danger that we're in across Europe are ready to start acting on that danger. They're ready to start closing the gap between words and actions that many of us are increasingly worried about what we hear. And we're joined by some of them today. What we see is an increasing threat. We see alarm calls being raised around Europe by military and political leaders because they are alive to the danger. And there's a danger coming for 4 interconnected reasons. 1 is the way we're allowing the war in Ukraine to play out. 2 is our glaring and pervasive lack of capabilities that we need to correctly defend ourselves in Europe and to deter Russia. 3rd is the uncertainty over the US security guarantee going forward. And 4th is that Europeans are currently projecting and signaling weakness rather than resolve. We think this raises the danger of sleepwalking into a perfect storm unless we wake up to that danger and act fast to address it. That's based on recent analysis we've done in the action group Zeitenwende and on the conversations that we had with many people at the Munich Security Conference. And as I mentioned, some of those leaders who are alive to the danger are with us today. We're joined by Anton Hofreiter, member of the Bundestag and chair of the European Affairs Committee from the Green Party. We're also joined by Hildegard Bentley, MEP from the Christian Democrats, who's rapporteur for strategy and critical raw materials, by Dr. Daniela de Ridder, who's OSCE Special Envoy for Eastern Europe in the Bundestag and a member of the SPD, the Social Democrats. We will be joined shortly by Ulrich Lechter from the Free Democrats, who's their spokesperson for foreign affairs in the Bundestag. And we're also joined by Sebastian Schäfer of the Greens, MP, member of the Budget Committee, and our international guest, Marko Mihkelson, who is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament of Estonia. They're all going to make brief statements. This part of the session is on the record and we are live streamed. We will then switch to an off-the-record session where journalists and others in the room can ask questions and get off-the-record answers. The questions and the statements can be in German or English, but please bear in mind that some of our guests are more comfortable speaking English than German, and others are more comfortable German than English. So with that said, Anton Hofreiter, I hand the floor to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for organizing this. And you already said we have the danger to walk in a perfect storm. And that's also my concern, that we have the danger to walk in a perfect storm because of the situation in the US. Of course, it would be a catastrophe if Trump was to be elected, but to be fair, that the US comes back really, the Democrats not only need the presidency, they also have to win both houses in the Congress, and that's not very probably. So even if Biden, which we all hope for, wins, we have to do more. We have to do more for Ukraine, we have to do more for our security, and we have to do more for a widened aspect of security, because we have to buy more weapons, we have to buy more ammunition, we have to prepare our armies, but we also have to be aware that in the times of weaponizing everything, we must realize that raw materials, semiconductors, and the supply chain is also a suspect of attack. So we have also to invest in all these areas. For all this, we need a lot of money. So we have at least to put again 100 billion more into our army and in our ammunition. I think we should have a European fund of around 100 billion to buy now all over the world ammunition and weapons for Ukraine. And then I think we should have a 100 billion fund more to make our infrastructure secure. That I think is really needed fast, because Russian army is preparing, also to preparing and testing NATO. And I only can agree with Landsbergis, the foreign minister of Lithuania, who said Europe has to prepare if it not wants to see its own Pearl Harbor moment, and I think that we have to do.
Anton Hofreiter, thank you very much for being so clear about that. And yes, that was the talk at the Munich Security Conference. And this is something Germans have perhaps felt quite insulated from, the threat, because of their territorial relative distance from Russia. But do beware of Russia's deep strike missile complex, was a message that came out of Munich. Daniela de Ridder, please.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. Unfortunately, I have to correct you. I'm not anymore special representative of Eastern Europe, which means in terms of the OSCE, Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus. But I'm vice president of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. But I'm all times in charge and very concerned by the situation of Ukraine. And what we have done inside of the Parliamentary Assembly, maybe it is not well known in this circle, is that we created a special committee on Ukraine to support better and much more, the issues of Ukraine. But it's right. I have been working on these issues during the last 2 years, and I had the opportunity to go to Kiev and to go to Baku, to go to Kiev, and with the Centrum. So I have been there, and it was a quite interesting visit. And you can imagine that if you are on the ground, you make a lot of experiences, and sometimes you can't sleep at night. So I fully agree with Anton Hofreiter. My serious concern is that we have so many conflicts in the world nowadays, so that there is a huge risk that we should neglect, or we shouldn't neglect the situation in Ukraine. But this is a risk looking forward to Gaza, and I have made this experience in the autumn meeting that we had in the OSCE Assembly last year. Everybody, all my colleagues, were talking about Gaza and the war in Gaza, neglecting the situation in Ukraine. But I think also the security conference in Munich showed how important it is that we still continue to support the Ukrainians, because we can't trust the Russians. I think this is quite important and serious to highlight. And we have to be aware that these days mark the second anniversary of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And 2 years means 2 years of suffering, 2 years of violence, of sexual-based violence, for instance, and we don't have to neglect that. Yes, it takes more support, more budget, I fully agree, but also more dialogue. But a dialogue between us, the supporters or the supporting countries, and the Russians are not possible for the moment. I don't, even if the OSCE, as far as you know, is a platform for dialogue, there is no dialogue possible. And as far as I've heard, the Russian delegation, I will leave for Vienna the day after tomorrow, because we are starting our winter meeting in Vienna. And you know that Vienna is one of those countries who doesn't refuse to the visas to the Russians. They didn't it last year, they didn't it this year. But I suppose, and the Russian delegation already declared maybe not to come to Vienna. But the experience I've made last year was that we were confronting, and therefore it is necessary that we have a dialogue platform like the OSCE. We confronted all the Russian delegation with the crimes they have done in Bucha or in Irpin, what we have seen and what we can witness. And so I think we have to be very brief. We have not only to talk about munition and arms and delivering more tanks, for instance, but we also have to talk about violence against humanity. So this is my most important topic. for today.
Absolutely. It's not just what we're going to do, but why we're doing it that we have to keep in mind at all times. And sincere apologies for the error on the job title. Your job title might have changed, but your support for Ukraine hasn't. That's been extremely clear. Marco, can I hand over to you this point about the Russians we have rather than the Russians we wish we had, and still confusing the two, thinking there can be trustful negotiations and so on, came up again at Munich. And it creates a problem if we have a misunderstanding about who we're dealing with here.
Yeah, first and foremost, Benjamin, thank you very much inviting me again back to very to this nice place, DGAP, and to have the opportunity to share our views on what's happening. If you started with this, that we perhaps could sleepwalk into the kind of perfect storm, I would say we're already in this perfect storm. And unfortunately, Munich conference told us, but also my meetings both in Washington, here in Europe as well, telling me that there is still kind of very low level of sense of urgency on a level of political decision making on the highest level. There is no understanding, perhaps, or shared understanding yet that the war which Russia started in 2014, I would like to correct, because this war is not going on only for the last 2 years, but Russia started to occupy Ukraine and illegally annex in 2014, and we can go a little bit even further on into history and basically tell that or state that Russia started its hybrid war against the West, at least at the time when Putin was in Munich in 2007 and delivered his speech. But what is important to see that they tell, and Putin himself tells exactly what he wants and what is after. Last October, during the Valdai Club meeting, he stated very clearly that this war is not only about Ukraine and Ukraine's territory or geopolitical balance in Ukraine, but it's about the basic principles what the new world order must based on. And this is why we have to understand that what they have done yet there in Ukraine, and also supporting Hamas with the terrorist attack on 7th of October, creating instability in Sahel region, working together with China, obviously, Iran, North Korea. So it is a big game, and we have to really be united today in first and foremost understanding what should be done. And I'm really surprised that in Germany, but also in the United States and some other countries who matter most within our alliance, it's so difficult on a level of top leadership to say what is our aim should be. Our aim should be strategic defeat of Russia in this war. Ukraine must win in this war if we want to restore peace and stability, not only in Europe, but in the world. And this is why we tirelessly in Estonia working in this regard, you know, on international level, but also ourselves. We lead in a way by example. We spend, starting from this year, in our own defense, 3.2% of GDP is politically strongly agreed up, and that for next foreseeable future, next 10 years at least, we keep it a minimum level of 3% of GDP. We have given to Ukraine military, financial, humanitarian help during the last 2 years in the level of 1.7% of GDP. And we ask our allies to follow with, I'm not saying that we've same level, but at least on a level of 0.25% of GDP annually. We are much stronger than Russia is. And this is why we have to really mount this necessary financial but also political might to conquer them and to really deliver Ukrainians what they ask and what they need. And last point really is that I have been in Ukraine many times, and since early 90s already, and I will go at the end of this week again together with my colleagues from different parliaments of Europe to show solidarity at this anniversary date. But also I will travel to front lines. And last time when I was at front lines, they defenders of Ukraine told me that please don't send us single-digit units of military equipment to us. Please send us weaponry, ammunition in quantities we really need to defend country, but not only defend, but also liberate Ukraine. And last few days, I had a direct conversation with one of my good friends who is fighting in a 3rd Assault Brigade of Ukraine, who was in Avdiivka. And he said that he has been constantly in battles for over the last 2 years. And what has happened in Avdiivka during last 5 days has been the most terrible time throughout this entire 2 years. We understand that the initiative is right now in the hands of Russians, and we have to right now understand that if we don't do right now critically ramp up our support to Ukraine, that will be very, very dangerous consequences could be for all of us.
That's absolutely right, Marco, and that echoes a lot of recent analyses from experts such as General Mick Ryan that you might have read recently, saying that the worst possible outcome this year is no longer stalemate. The worst possible outcome this year could be as bad as defeat. And that's what we have to face up to in order to prevent it from happening. And Marco, just to draw on two things you said there, which are echoed by colleagues of yours from the Baltics at our event at the Munich Security Conference. It was Foreign Minister Margaret Starkner from Estonia who said, we have to get fit for freedom. And part of that getting fit is spending enough on defense, because without that, with security being the irreducible duty of our states, the rest doesn't happen. And the second thing was Krišjānis Kariņš, the Foreign Minister of Latvia, who said, we cannot be afraid of our strength. We have to embrace our power. And you said, Europe can win this if we want to. And that's the question we have to answer. Hildegard Bentelé, from the European Parliament point of view, what would you add?
Well, I would like to pick up on Mr. Hofreiter. The EU has become more strategic. We have learned from the pandemic. We have also learned from the war, at least in industrial policy. We pushed also the Commission a little bit, and the report I did about critical raw materials, and we have now an act because we understood that we are too dependent from China in this. And I would like to spill over this strategic thinking now in the procurement sector, because I would like to call it a biotech moment or so. If I recall how we acted in the COVID crisis, how fast we produced vaccines. And I have the feeling that we have to shake up a little bit, all this procurement industry, because I think they have, I don't have that insight, but we really have to, what the Ukrainians call the disruptive moment, because they do so, they adapt armament, they invent new weapons. They are super digitized. So, I mean, and as you said, they're fighting super bravely on the ground, but they get exhausted. So we really have to come up to the task. And as you said, we are so ingenious in many regards, in many fields of economy. We have super SMEs. So we should be challenged. We should be ambitious and come up to this level, first of all, of Putin, who is constantly challenging us, and get into this mode that this is a very decisive year. I fully share your analysis that this is super decisive. And if you don't come up now to the task and understand this urgency and what I call this disruption, we cannot continue to do business like we did. And we are pressuring in the European Parliament, the Commission, and the Commission is on the issue, I would say. But we need, of course, member states. And here also, of course, the question of money comes in. We have created many funds outside of the EU budget, what we don't like so much as parliamentarians, but okay. But we have to think also in the future. And this is also a signal how we deal with the EU budget. If we if we include this task of defense into the EU budget. And I fully support the idea to have a defense commissioner, because this would, attribute a clear competence, and it would give also a bigger push, that somebody is in charge, responsible for this sector, and could push it forward. Since we have the new commission after the summer, or hopefully in autumn, and we could have this commission, I think that would give an additional impetus in this regard. So we are in a good position now, and we have laid some foundations, but I think we need now to show that we are really in a crisis mode.
That's it, to meet the moment. And this is where I would draw some sparks of hope from Munich, that there were leaders who stood up and said, of course, there is more that we can do. What Mette Frederiksen, the Danish Prime Minister, said, there's always more than you can do. There's stocks lying around that we haven't sent. But also this longer term point, our key advantage as free societies is innovation and creativity, and we're not harnessing the power of our free people yet. That's part of getting fit for freedom as well. We do understand that Commission President von der Leyen will be running again, and one of her, as we heard today, one of her promises was to create this defense commissioner, and there was a lot of interest in that at the MSC. Sebastian Schäfer, this is a broader struggle, though. We have many fronts upon which we can attack.
Yeah, well, thank you, Benjamin, and thank you for this invitation. I think we did not need the Munich Security Conference to know how pressing the situation in Ukraine is. President Zelensky has made it very clear how ruthless Putin sends his own soldiers into battle, and often into certain death. President Zelensky has also made clear what Ukraine needs most: ammunition, 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 and long-range cruise missiles. We must follow our friends in the Baltics and really do everything now, everything that's possible. We know that Russia will not stop its aggression unless we stop it in Ukraine. To me, it is unbearable that German companies continue to do business in Russia. I also addressed this 10 days ago as a citizen of this country and a shareholder at the general meeting of Metro. On March 1st, 2023, the Ukrainian National Agency on Corruption Prevention classified Metro as an international sponsor of the war because it continues to do business with the Russian Federation. As far as we know, Metro is not violating any sanctions imposed by the European Union against Russia in response to Russia's attack. And yet, Metro is financing the Russian war. It is stabilizing a dictatorship that poses a threat to the freedom and security of the people in Europe and in our country. And this is also the case with other companies, German companies, European companies, that continue to do business in Russia, so that the ruble is rolling in the truest sense of the word. But we also have deficits at the federal governmental level. In the media reporting, there are repeated examples of the delivery of relevant parts for Russian arms production. Infineon chips were detected in Russian rockets. We see how export figures to neighboring Russian countries have exploded in some economic sectors. And I do get the impression that customs is still doing its job by the book, and not everything is being done to stop this support for Russian aggression. We need to do everything we can do to finally stop the Russian war machine. We must fully enforce the sanctions. The frozen Russian assets in its entirety must serve the liberation and reconstruction of Ukraine. It's not just the interest on these assets that need to be used, as the European Commission is now planning. Make Russia pay.
A very clear message there. Thank you very much indeed, Sebastian Schäfer. We have been joined by Ulrich Lechter. So I'll give the last word of our press conference to you. There should be a microphone between you there. So we've said a lot about why Ukraine must win, about the need to invest more in our defense, about the need to close sanctions loopholes, about the need to keep the actual reasons we do this in mind, for justice for the victims, but also because of the terrible consequences that Russia is reaping upon us, and also to make sure that at the European level we are harnessing what actually is our power. What would you add to that, Ulrich?
Sorry that I'm late, and it's a pity that I haven't had the pleasure to hear what my colleagues said. So
thankfully there will be a recording.
I'm going to tell you, now it's for me new, but you heard it perhaps already. I'm with Denmark. It's an all-in time right now. You have 2024 being the year for Ukraine to make the point in this war. It has to end once in a while. We all know about what's going on with using gas weaponry right now at the East Front by Russia. Russia made clear with this assassination of Mr. Navalny last week what they think about Western democracies, what they think about our Munich Security Conference at the weekend. And I think it's totally clear that we need to tell the people that all partners in Europe have to pay what they can, that they have to put on the table what they can. And you all know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about France. I'm talking about Italy, all the good big partners, but it's not enough what they have sent to the Ukraine until now, and they can do more, and they have to do more. And we have to find a way when in the end of the year, perhaps Trump is coming back, how we are going to finance Ukraine. And we have to think about the $16 billion right now on the table, because they are not coming through the Congress. Well, everybody is hoping that that's going to happen, but we have to find a way to get along with if the Congress is not giving the funding. That's something for the Europe countries, and it's something about democracy. I just said in the lunchtime meeting with Taiwan and Cinema for Peace, and Taiwan is still looking on what's going on in Ukraine. And I think we are at the edge of a third world war. We don't want to talk about that, but the Ukraine question is a question of peace and democracy for the whole world. And that's not just a phrase, it's a truth.
Thank you for speaking so plainly and so clearly. That is the message that we intend to get out today, and it's one that's been delivered loud and clear. To put this very bluntly for the last point to sum up before we come to the questions, indeed, we need to stop looking at what we have done and consistently, complacently pointing to what we have done and look instead to what we need to do to win. That should be the direction of travel there. And we think there are at least 5 or 6 things that we could do immediately to say, this is our clear intention here. 1, give Ukraine what it needs to move to active defense, to hold the line in 2024 and build for offensive warfare in 2025. That includes giving missiles such as Taurus. 2, to seize the Russian assets, make Russia pay, as Sebastian Schäfer very clearly said. 3, to issue a clear path for Ukraine to get into NATO. But for that to happen, we need to have a clear offer of burden shifting, not just burden sharing on the European part to offer at the Washington summit. 4, massively ramp up our arms production, both for Ukraine and for ourselves. This draws on what Anton Hofreiter was saying about the need to invest at the European level and at the national level. 5, and this is the easiest thing to do, but it would perhaps have the greatest immediate impact, is that the Chancellor should say Ukraine should win. There should be a clear goal for the German people to be able to rally behind. And the goal defines the means. Once you set the goal clearly, the means will be found. And that's a message that's been delivered clearly by allies time and again. And we need to do what we must to get there. With that, I open to the floor and we go off the record. Thank you all very much for joining us online. There will be a recording you can watch again. Do follow us at DGAP for more insight and analysis.